Okay, now we're live.
All right, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. It has been a minute.
Yeah,
You had a good Christmas? We talked about this,
yeah,
but I figure the podcast people don't know that you had a good Christmas.
yeah. It was good. Had kids home. So
And then some travel logistic issues.
yeah.
Were they flying Southwest?
No, they
Okay.
weren't.
I don't know.
Southwest is no longer the deal that it used to be.
Yeah, well, that's why I was going to ask because I just keep seeing on the news
Yeah,
how many flights they canceled. They canceled like 15,000 flights in 3 days or
Oy.
something like that.
wow.
So yeah, that's why I was curious. But did their flights get canceled or anything like that?
Yeah, canceled because of weather, and
Yeah.
so it got so cold that we couldn't defrost runways. I think so, which is cold.
But outside of that, they made it.
They made it. We had a good time.
Yeah. I also had a good Christmas. Very low key. Lots of presents, books, new headphones, which I'm not using. I was telling Dr. Steve that these headphones I currently have on, for some reason, I get a lot of static shocks in my ears because of it.
Oh,
So it's like kind of annoying. But I will figure out the new headphones. There's a little bit of buzz. That's why I reverted. So yeah. You had asked, do I know what we want to talk about today?
yeah.
And I think that's a great place to start because you and I talked on the phone. What was it, 2 days ago?
A couple days ago. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about this, which is I've been just kind of feeling I don't know if you call it anxiety or just pressure, I guess, of like, oh, I got to think of things to say. I have to plan out subjects we're going to talk about, etc. And it's been getting kind of hard. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
And a part of me has like low key not been dreading this, but like, are you ready, Alex? Do you have stuff?
Right.
And I've been talking to Haley about it, and I'm talking to George about it too. And they keep reassuring me. They're like, "Oh, well, it's really interesting. I like listening to it," and which is all good. But it's just I think I'm starting to settle into the uniqueness of this format.
Yeah.
And the like quote unquote challenges, if you may, that come with it. But I have been thinking about that quite a bit the last, days or weeks.
I mean, I think the challenge with this format is always going to be, is this an entertainment thing, or is this a glimpse into what therapy is like, or what therapy can be like? Because if it's an entertainment thing, man, you better keep making the stories more spectacular than the last time, right? If you want to get eyeballs, as they say in advertising,
I know.
Like it better be not just this salacious story from your childhood, but a mega salacious story, and I don't know that people's lives are necessarily like that. And most people don't go to therapy feeling like I've got to really bring it today.
Yeah, totally.
So if you're feeling pressure to you and I off camera, we talk about dance monkey dance, like if you're feeling that pressure to bring something for entertainment value, that's not what therapy's about.
100%.
Talked to my daughter one time who listens to the podcast, and she says, yeah, there were a lot of times when Alex was talking and you're just like, mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, that's therapy. I mean, I have a friend who always says, the good Lord gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should probably be doing more listening than we do talking. And so I think there's a lot to be said for those moments of just, for the therapist anyway, of just listening. And that's what therapy is about. Sometimes I'll be in session with people and it's like we're not getting in much traction, or it's just not the day to be talking about stuff. And yet you have this appointment on your calendar and you feel like you have to
dance monkey dance.
Well, you have to make the appointment. You're going to get charged the same,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree with a lot of that. I think to your earlier point about like, is this entertainment or is this therapy? That's something that I know that this is therapy and I want this to be therapy, but just the world that I live in and the work that I do, is more in the entertainment side. So there's a part of my brain that's like, okay, yes, and like this is therapy, but also let's make it more interesting.
Right, but when you go see George, you
No.
never go, I've got to really bring it today.
Yeah, no.
Otherwise, our sponsors are going to,
Yeah. It's more so like, George, say something that makes me feel less angry. And he'll start laughing. But yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that's just this like not weird part of my brain, but it's a part of my brain. I'm always looking at things like, well, what is the end user's experience like? Which for therapy, you can't. That's just not a part of my therapy. I'm not thinking about anyone outside of myself, which sounds more self-indulgent than I mean it to. But it's just, I think, again, it's a weird aspect of this format. And then also, too, when you told me on the phone about your daughter's reaction, she's just in my head now. Like all of her comments and critiques are just running through my head now. But the one I was like, there's a lot of awkward silences. And it's like, that's something I worry about, right? It's like, well, if there's a long pause, are people going to be like, this is boring? But also, I have long pauses in therapy all the time. I'll say something, I'll just be thinking.
Right.
And the reason I don't judge myself is because I'm not thinking about, are there people listening right now?
Right.
But that idea of like the awkward silence got in my head a bit. And then on top of that, I was talking to Haley about it. And she's like, I was like, Haley, do you notice any awkward pauses or silences or anything like that? She says, no, but you should stop making that noise. I was like, what noise? She's like, that noise you do, it's like a... I'm like, what are you talking? And so now I have this other thing in my head where I'm like, am I making this weird swallowing, breathing noise? I don't know.
Well, and the interesting thing is when my daughter talks about awkward pauses, I'm like, I don't experience them as awkward.
Yeah.
Because sometimes sitting quietly with another human being is therapeutic. Sometimes sitting and letting someone have their moment to process or their time to process is therapeutic. And if I'm always anxious, like that's one of the first things they teach in therapy school, right? It's like, watch your own anxiety as the therapist. Don't let your anxiety drive the session. You're there for the client. You're not there to work out your own issues. So you got to be comfortable with silences. They don't seem awkward to me.
That is awesome. I'm so, as I hear you say that, I'm so envious because like, maybe this surprises, maybe you hear this a lot. I feel very uncomfortable in silence sometimes, especially around other people. Like awkward silence is kind of like nails on a chalkboard for me. But I think it's a little bit more challenging when it's like, I'm thinking about a podcast. But generally speaking, it is hard for me in my therapy sessions with George. Even if he's silent, I'll get agitated. I'll be like, well, are you going to say something? And he'll be like, what do you want me to say? But there's this like, I don't know how you would describe it. It's just like this bubbling kind of like, well, someone needs to say something. And it's hard because there are moments of silence in therapy. It's just challenging for me to deal with them, I guess.
Yeah. Well, in this format. Maybe, and it sounds like what you're saying is sometimes it's challenging just to deal with them in general.
100%.
Like that's an Alex thing, right?
Yeah.
The awkward silence, and how can I get more comfortable in those moments where the words are not filling space?
I don't know what it is. It's kind of fascinating because I kind of can create like how. Okay, so the question is like, how does that affect my relationships, right?
Yeah, that's always where I look. Yeah, you're learning.
Yeah. So sometimes when I'm with Haley, she's really comfortable in silence.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get angry with her. I find myself being like, you shouldn't, will you say something? I'll be talking and she'll just be listening. And I know she's a very thoughtful listener. But still I find myself being like,
hello,
yeah,
where are you?
Like I get angry and sometimes I'll like not contemptuous, but like I'll hold it against her sort of like, she is doing something wrong,
or doing something to you.
Yeah. And then, outside of that moment, I'll be like, well, wait a minute. That was kind of a weird reaction to have. She She didn't do any of that. Just was clearly Alex stuff going on.
Right.
But there's just something about.
Like, is she able to say that to you? Like, I was just in this space where I felt like I needed to be.
She will
And-
often say that.
Yeah, and you were like, well, so do you make that leap? Do you make that leap? Like, okay, that's an Alex thing. Then this is not Haley trying to stick it to me. She's not being cold and withholding in this moment, but I'm wanting that space to be filled. So what does that say about me? Do you go there?
I go there like in my head. Like there's a voice that's like, okay, that's a very reasonable response to sort of an Alex thing. Like I understand what you're saying, but the part of me is like, I can't connect how I feel with how I think. But so yes, I go there, and still being aware of that sort of Alex thing, I still do it all of the time. Like it's just a really hard one for me to work through. And I don't know if it's tied into these thoughts I have about like how a person should socialize and like how a person should interact with other people. But yeah, I can get really.
Yeah, and so that's a place where you want to ask, where do I get those messages, right? Where do I get those shoulds from? You know, is that something I picked up in my home environment? Is that something I got from a mentor somewhere? Is it something, you know, there are all kinds of rules that we think we live with in this world and in life. And not many of those rules are ever critically evaluated. Some of them are, some of them we get from our religious orientations or our ethic, our community ethic and things like that.
So what's weird for me is sometimes it feels like these rules that I have, like I believe them to be true, and to go against them would mean that I'm like going to end up not being successful or something. Which kind of sounds ludicrous as I'm saying it out loud. So I want to try and articulate it better, but it's like I believe these principles about, like, I don't know, have you read books like How to Win Friends and Influence People?
I know of them.
There's stuff like that where it's like, hey, if you want to get ahead in life, here's how you're supposed to act with other humans.
Sure.
And anytime I see something that's like outside of that bubble or those rules, I get made to feel really uncomfortable, because it's like, well, that's the wrong way of doing things. And if I start accepting the wrong way of doing things, I'm going to turn into a wrong person.
Yeah, reap the rewards of that.
Which is really weird. And I don't like saying that because it sounds so judgmental. And like, I don't know. Makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah, so my sense is that you're not alone in that. My sense is that a lot of people feel like there is a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And seldom are those ways questioned.
It's so, what is frustrating for me is like, I understand that.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it's hard to feel that way as well. So it feels like there's these two polar forces. One's like, okay, brain, here's what Dr. Steve's saying. That makes perfect sense. But then there's this like, I don't know, other part of Alex that's like the cranky Alex, right? Or the one that's holding on to these rules, right, that I was brought up with, or wherever they came from. It's like very reluctant to let go of them. Which I'd like to think that if I was aware of it, I could just be like, oh, okay, cool, let's stop getting triggered by it.
Yeah, but that's the rub. I don't think therapy is all about increasing awareness.
Yeah.
Because some people become very aware and they keep doing the stuff that they're doing.
That is.
So it's not just that insight isn't the only thing that leads to change or can lead to change. There are a variety of different things that can lead to change. And I think a lot of people go to therapy thinking, I need to understand this thing better or that thing better. And okay, so you understand it, but you keep doing it. So
yeah.
So you may be the kind of person who, maybe insight works in some cases, but you need to have maybe
action,
corrective experiences, or experimenting with trying a new way on, or just even looking at somebody who's doing this activity or this approach in a different way than you would do it, and see how it goes.
In that instance, like if I see someone doing something a different way, I typically, my initial response is like, well, that's wrong or that's dumb. You know, it's like a judgmental response as opposed to oh, that's another way of doing things. Both equally good. No,
Perhaps.
yeah. But, and through my relationship with Haley, she has been very helpful. I think this process has taught me, I've gotten better. I'd like to think I've gotten better at being like, okay, there are multiple ways of doing things. There are multiple ways of looking at things. Like, my way isn't necessarily the objective truth, which.
Yeah, and the powerful part is if you can do that, like let me go back to the example of Haley kind of being to herself or not filling the air with words, and you're expecting her to have some kind of response, and she's just thinking or she's being pensive or whatever. If you can in that moment just go, I'm expecting the space to be filled with words, and Haley's doing it a different way. I'm just going to ride this out and see where it goes. That's you kind of learning how to emotionally regulate instead of saying, hey, speak up, or hey, I asked you, you should be filling the space,
Yeah.
Like then what happens is that interaction becomes about why is she not filling the space? Why is she not doing what I think she should be doing, or the person I'm interacting with? Why they're not doing what I think they should be doing the right way? But if you can hold on to yourself and go, okay, I'm expecting words to fill this space. Let's see where this goes. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. What I was thinking about, the cause for that awkward silence, your daughter's wondering why was there that awkward silence there. The reason what I was thinking about is like, oftentimes when I'm in a situation and I'm expressing myself or something that I'm feeling or thinking to someone else, I think the reason I've made so uncomfortable by silence is sort of like some kind of insecurity about how I'm being received. My thoughts are being received.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I wonder if like the root of it might be, I just kind of want affirmation of some kind in a weird way. And silence feels like rejection to me. And as opposed to just, so that's like the Alex thing.
Is it silence feels like rejection, or is it silence feels like non-confirmation? Silence feels like ambiguity. Silence feels like not what I was expecting.
Silence feels like ambiguity. Silence feels like uncertainty.
Right.
And not to get super trippy, but maybe this ties into the whole mastery thing. But when I don't know what someone is thinking, when there is silence, I can't know what they're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me feel very uncomfortable. And it makes me feel angry. Or I don't know which comes first. But
So is it anger? Like, does it go uncomfortable and then anger? We talked about anger as being a secondary emotion, right? So is it uncomfortable? Now I'm angry because you're not making me feel comfortable in this moment. Like, Haley, it's your job to make me feel comfortable in this interchange.
Yeah.
The rules of this interchange are, I'm going to say something, and it's your job to make me feel good about what I said.
Yeah. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that. I feel a little bit ashamed to say that, and this is kind of crazy, but like, that's how I think in a way look at therapy too.
So a friend of mine who's passed away, his name is David Snarch. He wrote a book called Passionate Marriage. He wrote a book called The Sexual Crucible, and
Wow.
he talks a lot about how our relationships, our intimate relationships, are as much about people growing, and our sexual relationships are as much about people growing, learning how to become vulnerable in the presence of another person. It's as much about that as being comfortable and being close to somebody. And he talks about two types of intimacy that he sees. And one he calls, I don't know if we've talked about this before in here, one he calls other validated intimacy and self-validated intimacy.
No, I'm not.
And in his book, he goes on to describe the two. And the other validated intimacy kind of sounds like this. It's like one person to their partner, right? I want to be close to you, so I'm going to tell you things about myself, but it's your job to make me feel safe and secure. That's your job. That's the expectation. And if you don't, then I'm not going to tell you about myself. But I want to, so you have to. It's almost like this contractual obligation that if I'm going to open up myself, rip open my heart to you, whatever I say, you have to validate and you have to make me feel good about what I said. And if I do it, then you have to do it because we have to reciprocate. There's a tit for tat element.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that can only get you so far in a relationship. And then he says self-validated intimacy kind of sounds quite a bit different. It sounds like this. I want to tell you things about myself because I want to be close to you.
Yeah.
And I can't expect you to you weren't put on the earth to validate everything about me. But I want to be close to you. In order to do that, I have to share things about me. And I have to put myself out there and risk that you're not going to like what you hear, and risk that you're not going to just agree with everything that I say. But I have to stand on my own 2 feet in this relationship. I have to put myself out there. And if you, out of your own interest, desire, willingness, accept what I have to say, that's great. That's how intimacy grows. And I'm willing to put more out there as a result of what I hear from you. But it's not your job to validate me. It's not your job to make me feel good about myself and about my thoughts and feelings and emotions. And
I would like to feel like I would like to accept more responsibility for how I feel. And like, it's again, this is a great example of my brain being like, clearly this makes sense. Why is this so hard for you to do? But I would love to just take more responsibility for how I feel all the time. And a lot of the times I don't. I like get mad if I share something with someone and they don't make me feel better.
right.
You know, like, and that's saying that out loud. It's like, well, okay, I mean, that's 100% within your control, Alex, as to like how you feel, right? And it's not that person's job to make you feel better. If you want to share it with them, great. But like, it's not this, hey, here's the thing. Okay, I gave it to you. Now make me feel better about it.
Right.
But yeah, it's something like.
And I think that's where sometimes therapy breaks down, as therapists often feel like their job is to just validate everything their client says instead of pushing back.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that there are places to push back and to say, really? I mean, do you think that in every case, or does, like there's.
I am okay with pushback. I think sometimes pushback can make me feel angry because for example, in this instance, I think the first and foremost thought in my mind is like, okay, I hope what I'm saying doesn't make me a bad person, or doesn't make me crazy, or doesn't make me weird. And once that is, so for example, if Dr. Stevie would be like, hey, that's totally normal, Alex, you're not crazy, don't worry. Then it would be like, okay, what's the pushback? Like I can handle the pushback, as opposed to like pushback right away where it's like, so is what I'm feeling and thinking dumb? I think that's always my like number one concern, is that like what I'm thinking and feeling is like trivial or like a result of poor logic or like immature or some judgment. I guess, that's
crazy. I mean,
yeah.
kooky kind of.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I think my immediate fear is always judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But once that like box is ticked, my next follow up is always like, okay, cool. Now what's the next step? Once I feel like I have personal safety, or whatever you want to, the ego safety is safe.
But I think that safety is an illusion, because I don't think you get it until you risk being kooky or crazy or judged in some way. Like if I'm going to show you my real self, then I have to be prepared for that to land on you in a weird way, and you not to accept it. Like, no, we don't all think that is kind of crazy. See, that you think that way. And the only way that I get more security and safety in relationships is by opening up and risking that. And that was the big message from David Snarch's work and others who talk about that self-validated intimacy. You can't expect safety. Safety doesn't come until there's a risk. And what I hear a lot from people is, it's your job to make me feel safe. And if I feel safe enough with you, then I can judge. But then I can open myself up. But if I'm not opening myself up, it's your fault because you're not a safe person. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. I don't think it works that way.
So let me ask you a question. Do you feel like I open up to you for the most part?
Yeah, but I imagine that there's deeper places you can go.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked offline, off camera about, hey, there's some things that I'm not willing to say because they have implications for other people in my life.
Yep.
And I feel a sense of protection for those people. I think that's fair game. But then I think I've responded and said, our work will always be somewhat limited.
Yes.
If there are barriers to you really opening yourself up.
Yeah.
But I think the stuff that we do with our therapists in therapy is just the same that we do in other relationships. We give a little bit, we test the waters, we see if what we've given is met with acceptance, understanding. Do I feel seen, heard, understood?
I guess the question I have is like, in regards to that, what was his name?
Snarch, David Snarch.
David Snarch's work is like, how does one, like, what are the ways one becomes comfortable with sharing oneself and risking? You don't?
No.
You just keep doing it anyway?
No, I mean, they're called comfort zones for a reason, right? There's no growth in a comfort zone. So the only growth that we get is by getting out of that. The only growth I have is by sharing things that maybe I'm reluctant to say.
Yeah.
The only way you get to know me more is by me sharing more about myself than I've been willing to share prior to this.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, so like how I personally feel is, this might not seem like this to you, but I felt like I kind of just went out on a limb a little bit in terms of being like, hey, I feel embarrassed and ashamed about this way that I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And when I express these kinds of things, the first thing I look for is some sort of like affirmation in terms of like, hey,
yep,
it's okay. Like,
you're not crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
And I felt like I literally spelled that out and I didn't get it. So in my head, I'm like, oh, okay. Either A, he didn't pick up on that, or B, he's like, nope, not going to give it to you. And so I'm kind of curious, like, does that, like, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I want Alex to be comfortable being Alex.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether you have validation from this guy who you spend an hour with a week or 45 minutes with,
Yeah, you want it so it doesn't even matter.
Why give me that much power? Your therapist, your partner, your boss at work. Like, the goal is for you to get comfortable with Alex, not get you to get comfortable with other people, or other people get comfortable with you.
Yeah. No, I would agree that
that's the self-validated part.
Yep.
It's like, I'm going to say this, and Steve, if there is an element of therapy that I think is really nice, which is I'm going to validate, I'm going to understand, and my therapist really gets me. Okay, but what about you getting you?
Yeah. Well, I think
that's more valuable, I think.
And, validation for me personally is fascinating because I look at myself as someone who takes a lot of risks. Like, I'm a very public facing person in the sense of, let me rephrase that. I put myself out there a lot. I don't know how many people are watching or looking, but I put myself out there quite a bit. So I do feel comfortable with who I am. With that said, all that aside, I still feel very uncomfortable with certain elements of who I am.
Yeah.
And I still, maybe that is like the old cliche with creatives and artists and et cetera. It's like, there's that famous Sally Fields quote from when she won an Oscar. She's like, you like me, you really like me. Which, like, it's so sad, but it's so true. Validation
Well, who doesn't want that? I
Yeah.
also think that's like an incredibly normal thing to want.
Okay.
I want people to like me. I want people to think I'm not crazy. I want people to respect me. I want to be seen, heard, understood
Yeah.
in everywhere that I go.
Yeah. It's just sometimes challenging to balance like that feeling of wanting to feel heard and respected and liked with also like, yeah, I also love who I am and I respect who I am and stuff. Maybe it's something, maybe that voice that's always like, I want to be liked. Maybe that never goes away. I always assume that there's like people out there who are so just kind of chill and self-assured that they, you know, that those thoughts never enter their brain ever.
I'll bet you're right. I'll bet there are those people. I don't know many of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a desirable state. Like many of us want to think like we don't care what other people think. But I tell you, I teach classes. I have 50 students in every class that I teach pretty much at the U. And there's 49 students who are like, hey, great class, one of the best classes I've ever had. And there's one person who's like, you don't know what you're talking about and you're kind of an idiot. And what do I remember?
The one.
That's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one that hurts the most.
Do you think that that's something like, so I totally 100% know how that goes. Do you think that is that just a part of life? Or is it like, hey, I got to figure out a way to make that not the case and focus on the 49 and just let the one go? That's kind of where I'm at.
I don't know. Like when I get those comments, I want to talk to the one.
Me too.
I want to talk and say, well, maybe you understood. Like everybody else loves me. Why don't you love me? What's your problem?
Invest all of this effort into the one instead of the four. Like I find myself wanting to spend way more energy on the one that doesn't like me than the 49 who do. Yeah. And I kind of feel, I feel a little bit of embarrassment about that, and a little.
I'll bet that you're not alone in that. I identify a lot with that myself.
Yeah.
And I'll bet there are people who will be like, I'm so happy that there's 99% that had a great experience in my class or whatever.
I would like to get there. That would be cool. Like if there was a larger, I feel like maybe you can attribute that to pessimism versus optimism, or like glass half full, glass half empty. And I just, sometimes I feel like I'm always looking for that, whatever the representative of that one person is, whether it's a project and I did 95% of it well, but someone made one comment in a meeting, you just focus on, it's so easy. Like it's so exhausting how easy it is to focus on the negative.
Right.
I just, so for example, when I'm sharing, when I'm talking to Haley and we're having, I'm sharing things about myself and she's responding well. If there's one thing I share where there's silence, that immediately I focus on that and that triggers me, right? And it's like, well, you're not listening or you're not accepting who I am or blah, blah, blah. When there's like thousands of other examples of her supporting, listening, responding, accepting.
Right. And it's hard to tease out whether it's, am I focusing on the negative because I still have an ethic of wanting to improve, wanting to make things better? Is it that I'm focusing on it because it hurt my feelings and it's somehow a commentary on some shortcoming that I have that can't be fixed? And maybe it's both of those things in different amounts, right?
Yeah, it's probably shortcomings. I'm gonna be honest. I have many of them, but that it is a goal. Like I would love to be more at peace with. I keep thinking about this conversation we had about mastery.
Yeah, and ambiguity.
Like I would love to be more accepting of what I can't control or just what I don't even know, right? Like I assume things in silence. I make assumptions that aren't true. There's no way that they are. Maybe they're a little bit true, but there's no way of knowing. I would love to be more comfortable with that. Acceptance in of itself, I think, is a great challenge for me. I'm more of a mastery kind of guy.
Yeah, well, and my sense is that mastery has probably served you well. mastery has served a lot of people well, like mastering my craft, mastering my sport, mastering my writing abilities, whatever. That we go into vocations that we end up getting paid for our mastery skills, not the way we embrace ambiguity.
Yep.
Like nobody's going to say, like, tell me about the last time you really embraced ambiguity.
Yeah, yeah.
We're looking for someone. We're looking for someone who can embrace ambiguity. We don't tend to do that in our market-driven world.
Yeah.
But that's actually what this space is about, because I show up with my images and visions and fantasies of mastery, and you show up with yours. And actually, therapists are taught how to be more masterful at embracing ambiguity. Like, yeah, it could be that, or it could be this. There are multiple ways to do life. Are you not happy with the way you're doing life? Let's look at that and let's change that. Because there are multiple ways you can choose. There's a cafeteria of ways to do relationships, to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
mental health, mental wellness.
I think that kind of reminds me of earlier in our conversation today, this idea of like responsibility for how we're feeling.
Mhm.
Like there is some element of like, okay, Alex, if you are feeling uncomfortable with aspects of, how like when you open up to people, like what are ways in which you can become more comfortable with that discomfort, or like what are ways you can continue to step outside your comfort zone to push yourself to, risk and expose in spite of, or unattached to any kind of response without needing any kind of response.
I don't know if we've talked about this before, Alex, but I'm using this more and more with the couples that I work with. I have a colleague, Jason Whiting, who talks about ways that couples approach arguments, conversations. And he says a lot of couples approach their disagreements from a more like a legalistic perspective. They show up as lawyers.
Yeah.
And have we talked about this?
No, but
So one way of showing up like a lawyer is I have a version of the story that is true, and my job is to discredit your version of it.
and prove mine, and
And prove mine.
here's my evidence.
And sway the jury, right? And here's the evidence, and here's how your evidence is lacking. And so Jason talks about showing up, not like too many of us show up like lawyers in our relationships instead of showing up like scientists. And scientists, they observe. They say, let's set up an experiment and see what happens. And we'll record our responses, and we'll develop hypotheses, and so scientists, of course, science is about knowing things, but knowing after multiple experiments and realizing that the laws of science, the laws of thermodynamics and things like that, sometimes they change, right? Light is a particle and a wave. Wow, that's mind-blowing.
yeah,
You're like, how can it be both and so, but being open to the idea that this experiment is going to tell us whether light is a particle or a wave, and then, wow, it turns out light is both. So how do we get our head around understanding this thing and continue to test it in different situations and different occasions? So if couples can show up, if people can show up more like scientists and observe and say, this is how I understand it. How do you understand it? Here's this thing that happened at your mom's funeral or your dad's wedding or whatever, How did you see it? What was instead of this is what happened and that's the end of the story.
Showing up like lawyers is like having having a predetermined, this is right, absolute truth.
Mastery.
Where science is like, let's figure it out together. We don't know what it is. Let's figure it out. And I think of all my anytime I have it's like, okay, well, let's make sure we understand why we're right. Our version, we have the evidence to explain why we feel what we feel.
Right.
And when we present it, they'll have no choice but to be like, okay, yes.
Right.
Versus,
And the thing is, the scientists can also come and say, here's all my reasons for thinking the way I think. But now I want to be open to my colleague who is saying, here's reasons why your thinking might be off. And here's where you could add to how you're thinking about this particular thing. Are you open to that?
It's hard to be a scientist when you have like emotional like hurt, or where you feel like feelings like are strong. It's challenging when it feels personal.
Yeah, because then you have to put yourself in a position where you can say, I can have strong feelings one way, and I have to be open to the fact that the people I'm interacting with may have strong feelings in another way.
Yeah. Like I think of conversations I've had where I felt wronged,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard for me to, I don't know if I would have been able to be like, hey, here's, what I'm thinking and feeling, but also too, I'm open to your experience.
Yeah.
I can't, it's hard for me to get there. Because a lot of the times, when I'm carrying hurt, I'm not interested in the other person's perspective.
Because I'm so into my hurt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the mark of a mark of emotional maturity, is to be able to say, yeah, I'm having this experience. I'm really curious what your experience has been like, and I don't need your experience to match mine in order for us to still understand each other and connect with each other. But that's hard to do.
It is hard to do. I guess the only thing I can think of is like, just work through the hurt first on your own as best you can. And I think there's something to be said about taking time to process something.
Yeah.
But I think this is a great spot to wrap up. And I'm going to call this episode Scientists versus Lawyers or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I love that analogy. It's great. And I'm going to work on being more of a scientist. Get Haley and I matching lab coats, and we'll get the safety goggles. And whenever we have to have a discussion or argument, we'll put on our costumes. That should be fun.
The ironic thing is that the scientist perspective, as we've presented it here, matches that self-validated intimacy instead of the other validated intimacy. Because when I come at you like a lawyer, I'm presenting my evidence so that you will agree with me. And then I feel validated when I'm agreed with, instead of just showing up saying, this is how I see it. I'm open to other perspectives, that this is where I'm at right now.
Versus
that other validated intimacy.
Yeah. Of which is like, hey, here's what I'm thinking, but I also am curious. Yeah. Doesn't mean anything whether or not I'm right or wrong. It's about finding some sort of objective truth or what,
Like, interesting.
Yeah.
You feel that way. We both shared this experience and you felt that way. I walked away feeling this way.
Mm-hmm.
I focused on this, you focused on that. And those things are largely colored by the filters we see that we experience the world through. And those filters are made up of early experiences, family of origin influences, our racial and cultural context. If people see me a certain way because of the color of my skin, or the gender that I have, or my non-gender conforming way of being, that's going to go into how I see the world. Those things all influence, all those contextual factors influence. Things to think about.
All right. That's all our time for today's session. I got another client coming in.
Okay. All right. I like that.
No, that was what you used to say.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Dr. Steve. And to everyone listening, stay happy, and we'll catch you later.
Okay. All right. Take care.
See ya.